unless you've lived a very charmed life, like Deacon Larry. The man has never had a headache, well, at least until he met me. But we've all at some point come into contact with suffering, whether it's suffering ourselves or especially in others or in the world in general. And really, since the beginning of civilization, religions, philosophers have tried to answer the problem of suffering. Why do we suffer, and how do we make sense of the problem of pain? And how, of course, do we square it all with a loving Creator? Well, the ancient Greeks, the Stoics, would often say, when they were trying to answer the problem of suffering, one should just detach from the way things are. In other words, the problem is we expect something. When it doesn't turn out the way we expect it, we suffer, we experience deprivation, we experience pain. And in detachment, you'll find a sort of peace, a freedom from desire, and then a freedom from pain. Buddhism takes it in a different direction. It has as one of its first precepts that all life is suffering. It's a very powerful and profound insight. Not that every moment of life is painful, but that desires can never really be satisfied, so it does lead to suffering. And all of Buddhism is an attempt to solve the problem of suffering. The Buddhists would say through things like meditation and negation of self, we blow out the candle of desire. That's what's meant by nirvana. We do away with all desire, we blow out the candle of desire, we stop desiring, and we stop suffering. Plato, of course, had his own take on suffering. He said we deal with suffering by meditating on the great eternal dimensions to understand the realm of the divine, of the forms, as he called it. So we put aside the vagaries of this world and we come to understand the eternal, and you find a kind of peace. There's a whole lot of other philosophies and religious twists on suffering that give us very keen insights. But Christianity understood the problem too and offers, I think, the best answer to it. It's not Stoic detachment. It's not Buddhist annihilation of the self. It's not a Platonic journey upward to the eternal. The gospel this weekend from the 16th chapter of Matthew focuses on the issue head on. Remember, last week we heard Jesus declare to Peter, you are rock, and on this rock I will build my church. Now just a few verses later, everything seems to get blown up. Everything shifts. After declaring the church, he now shows what it means to be church and what this new way of life would be. And so Jesus starts out saying he will suffer, he will go to Jerusalem, suffer, be killed, and on the third day be raised. Now just imagine the psychological trauma of that statement. It probably had Peter and the others feeling really good about themselves. They were going to be the leaders in the new kingdom. They were going to be the most important people. And then there's this deeply disturbing words that seem to be at odds with what came before. I mean, suffering and death for the one they loved? No way. God's anointed, the Christ, would suffer. And then we have this incredible rebuke by Peter. No, Lord, God forbid that should happen to you. We all get moments like that when we think we know better than the Lord himself. And you always know when you begin rebuking Jesus, you are probably not in a very good spiritual space. But Peter here is like all of us, and he says, Lord, God forbid, no such thing should happen to you. But Jesus, of course, is having none of it because his life, his kingdom is not about worldly glory and power. And so he says very shockingly to Peter, get behind me, Satan. It's kind of shocking. The one he had just given the keys to the kingdom, the one he called Rock, and now, can you imagine being called Satan? It's rather extraordinary. Because you see, suffering and death were not part of Peter's agenda. But Jesus is proposing to them the only valid solution to suffering and evil and the only valid path to joy. And it's really a high paradox, I know. Pain and suffering will be overcome not by just stoic resignation. That's not Jesus' path. It's not a biblical stance. Just resign yourself to good and evil. No, the Bible is filled with passion for justice, and so is Jesus. Nor is this the Buddhist total negation of self. No, you find yourself really in the Christian way of life. None of those other philosophies work. So what's Jesus' solution? Well, his solution is the sacrifice of self in love. The solution to the problem of suffering and pain is the sacrifice of self in love. Jesus announces he's going to Jerusalem to give himself away. At the Last Supper, he tells his disciples, "This is my body, which will be given up for you. This is the cup of my blood, which will be shed for you." Jesus will sacrifice himself in love for the other, and in this he will come to life and become the source of life for others. Every time we make the sign of the cross, look at what simply happens. The first two letters make the I, and then we cross ourselves, in a way blotting out our egos, blotting out our own selfish desires, and embracing the will of God. The only way to overcome pain and suffering is to deny yourself and to give yourself away in love. And in the measure that Peter didn't get it, he became a Satan, a stumbling block, an opponent. And now, having rebuked Peter, Jesus gives the others, as well as us, the proper formula. And like them, we should pay careful attention. So he says, "Whoever wishes to follow me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Path of discipleship is the path of sacrifice. And that means it will be at times a path of suffering, but it's the only way past the suffering into real life. Whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. I'm sure you want to be happy. I do. We don't want to be stoics. We don't want to follow this path of complete annihilation of self. And so, to be happy, we have to lose our life in love and find it once again. Give yourself away as a gift and you'll come to the resurrection. Jesus his offer to us is to take up your cross. When you think about it, it's actually a very empowering invitation. Though St. Paul would often remark, to the world the cross is folly, foolishness. It seems absurd and it doesn't seem like a recipe for a happy, successful life. But that first generation of Christians understood that the cross was a way of living, a lifestyle. And the cross was an invitation to an alternative way of life and a way to understand reality itself. But it is an invitation that is contrary to our natures, and often we simply want to decline the invitation. Mother Teresa often told the story someone said to her, "When you're suffering and in pain, Mother, it's Jesus kissing you." And she would often say, "Well, please tell Jesus to stop kissing me." We all at times want to walk away from the pain and the suffering and choose a different path. But the way of the cross is an ongoing invitation, because it's a willingness to transform suffering into something life-giving. The reason for that is because the cross is the power of God. And God's power begins to work in us when we embrace the cross. And it's that power that transforms us and helps us to transform our culture and our world. So don't just wear a cross, but accept the invitation to the way of the cross each day. And the power of God will be available to you. And when suffering does intrude in your life, you will be able to transform it and to turn it into something new, something better, something life-giving.